All right, so being 7:01, I call to order the Lancaster Zoning Board of Appeals. Start off with roll call for attendance. So Gene Rich.
Here.
Mike Bray. Here. Eric Jacobowitz. Yep. Frank Sullivan. Here. Dennis Hubbard. Here. Rob Alex. Here. All right, so for the public hearing, we're continue public hearing for 13 Neck Road today. Kind of my thoughts in terms of an agenda and what we want to work through based on our last conversation. I'd like to have Attorney Costa just walk through again, kind of give us a refresher into what we're working towards and next steps, etc. Just kind of refresh everybody. It's been obviously a long process. Go through the peer reviews, go through the applicant's comments, start to discuss the overall project, kind of continue that conversation we had last time around this project overall with the board. And then time allows, we'll have some public comment, but I really think the point today is really for us as a board to have a discussion around this overall project and direction.
Because next week we have to close the hearing, correct? So we are done next week.
We are done. Yes, we're done next week. Well, I think it's technically extended to August 16th. Correct me if I'm wrong, right? Is it the 40 days? Yeah.
That's to
that's the
40 days to
we have to close the hearing next week.
Public comments done.
Yeah.
We close the hearing next week and then we start our negotiations.
Right.
Yeah. Correct. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Attorney Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As you know, Adam Costa, me telling my Costa, so good to see you again. I wasn't in attendance at your last meeting. My partner, Brian, was here. But again, I've had multiple conversations, so he brought me in to speak and recap the discussion that the board had a few weeks ago. I spoke with Rob, with the chair, earlier today, and thank you to the facts that I just provided. A bit of a recap. I know we spoke at the outset of this process about the 40B process. 40Bs are difficult for zoning boards of appeals, whether they're experienced or inexperienced, having presided over on these projects. It's not what we do as a CBA on a week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year basis. You're used to special permits, variances, administrative appeals, time again. The sorts of matters that under state law you have a fair amount of discretion in determining whether a project is appropriate. When you're acting on a special permit application, you have guiding factors in your zoning bylaw, but ultimately the buck stops with you. You can decide as a CBA whether a particular use is appropriate for a neighborhood. You can take a look at traffic conditions and nuisance factors and say it's just not right here. And you can make a decision not to allow that project. You can issue a project and not home. And the statistics will tell you that far more than not, you as a board will be successful in defending the appeal. Because the courts have said time and again in the context of traditional special permits that boards like yours are entitled to deference. The courts have said local boards are more familiar with local conditions than some judge sitting in Woburn or Florence or Boston. 40B is different. 40B is a state mandate. It's been on books for over 50 years. And under Chapter 40B, the Commonwealth has said there is a presumptive need for affordable housing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, all the cities and towns across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And as a consequence of that presumptive need, we are going to establish a much higher burden for zoning boards of appeals to deny projects. And more than that, we're going to allow applicants to seek waivers, essentially exceptions, from local zoning and non-zoning requirements that would otherwise be applicable to everybody else. And so that's what 40B is all about. Now, we can come forward and propose a project that can never be built under your current zoning or any other exemption to your current zoning. But it's permissible under Chapter 40B. Typically, it's a project that is somewhat intense. Often it's a project that has components that wouldn't satisfy or qualify under other provisions of your bylaw, setback requirements, lot area requirements, height requirements, everything, landscaping, lighting. Applicants can seek waivers from those otherwise applicable standards. So we started this process a number of months ago. We have gone through the typical process of reviewing the information submitted by the applicant, where that information is technical in nature, engineering, traffic, things of that sort. You have engaged peer review consultants. Those consultants have reviewed the information submitted by the applicant's consultants, have offer comments. The applicant's consultants have gone back and forth with your consultants in an effort to address any concerns. And I think for the most part, that process is wrapped up. There may be a few outstanding issues that I saw in the latest correspondence submitted within the past few days. But for the greater part, that back and forth has concluded. You have your final feedback from your engineering consultant, Daily Ward. You have your final feedback from your traffic consultant, Mass & Associates. And you have various feedback from the other boards and commissions and committees and departments of the town of Lancaster. So now your job at this stage in the process is to consider all that information and then to apply that 40B standard. And so when you're acting on a comprehensive permit application, you really have three options. And these options are no different than you have in the other context. So I'm going to tell you a bit of a difference in terms of how the test gets applied to whether these decisions would stand or fall if they were challenged on the. So your choices are the obvious ones. You can, on one hand, approve a project without conditions. I can't remember the last time I saw that happen in any municipality. You can deny a project, in which case you need to provide a basis for the denial, but you don't need to condition the project to deny because the project's been denied. Or you can do what most boards tend to do, particularly in the 40B commitments, and that is approve the project subject to conditions. Conditions that are meant to address your most serious concerns and are meant to mitigate components of the project that might have an adverse impact on the community in the eyes of. So let's talk about the two obvious options. Again, I'm going to rule out and not recommend an approval without conditions. So let's talk about an approval with conditions versus a denial of the comprehensive permit. I decided that the chapter 40B manual that was drafted by MHP, I think I circulated a copy before this process got underway. It was redrafted in 2017. Can say this far better than I can. So I'm just going to quote from it because it does an excellent job in a few sentences. Distinguishing between approvals with conditions and denials, and the standard that the board has to apply to do one versus the other. So here's what it says about the options you have. It says if a community doesn't meet one of the statutory minimum, that is that if you haven't get 10% affordable housing in your community, you qualify, you're not there. If you haven't met one of those statutory minimum, then this phrase, consistent with local needs, which is the standard you have to apply, means that you have to balance the regional need for affordable housing against local health, safety, open space, and site and building design concerns. These concerns must be valid, they must be compelling, and they must be documented. Over time, the Housing Appeals Committee, which is where an appeal would go if the developer challenges the conditional approval or denial. Over time, the HAC has established high standards for ZBA to demonstrate consistency with local needs. Demonstration of verifiable local concerns about the health and safety of residents of the proposed housing or the surrounding neighborhood or the community as a whole. And serious building and site design deficiencies that cannot be rectified with conditions of approval, and an establishment that the local requirements imposed by the ZBA are essential for protecting these public health, safety, design, or environmental or open space concerns. That's your standard for denying a comprehensive permit. You have to show that those concerns I just referenced, health, safety, open space, design and building safety, that you have concerns in those areas that supersede the presumptive need for affordable housing. So that's the denial standard. And if there is a challenge, if you deny a comprehensive permit, the applicant appeals to the Housing Appeals Committee. In the first instance will be the town's burden, the board's burden, to establish that those local concerns exist and that they supersede the presumptive need for affordable housing. So now we'll talk about the other options of approval with conditions. So here's what the guide says about approval with conditions. By contrast, when a ZBA approves a permit with conditions and the developer appeals, the Housing Appeals Committee's standards of review initially are quite different. In these cases, the developer has the burden of showing that the ZBA's conditions, viewed in their entirety, make the project uneconomic. If the developer can prove that point, the community then has to show that the conditions are consistent with local needs. The conditions are consistent with local needs. Again, meaning that they're reasonable in view of the regional need for low to moderate income housing. So the burden essentially shifts. When the appeal is made, the burden first is the applicants to show that the conditions you've imposed when you approve the project with conditions would render the project uneconomic. And there's a legal definition you get into in terms of what that means, but they have to establish that for the HAC. If they can establish it, then the burden would shift to you, because now you're in the same posture as denial. They're showing it's an uneconomic project that's essentially a denial. The burden would then shift to the board to establish that there are those local concerns that should trump the presumptive need for affordable housing. So let's roll that back into where we are now in the process. I understand that what occurred at your last meeting is you began a discussion about the project generally, some of the concerns that have been raised by departments. I understand there was a discussion about density concerns, how those density concerns are tied to some of these issues that I just referenced, public safety in particular, in terms of accessibility of buildings, in terms of location of parking spaces as they compare to the width of drive aisles and walkways and things of that sort. If the board has these sorts of concerns, you can certainly engage in a dialogue. First, you should consult amongst yourselves and deliberate on this topic, but you can then engage in a dialogue with the applicant about what those concerns mean and how they can be dealt with. The applicant, I understand, has said that a reduction in the density of the project will render the project uneconomic. And so you then have the option, this is going to feed in a bit to where we are in the process and the time we have left. You then have the option, the current state guidelines, the regulations, to tell the developer, if you are going to stand here and represent to the board that the project will be rendered uneconomic by imposition of a density reduction or other condition, which I understand we're discussed tonight, then you've got to bring that to us. You've got to prove it to us by showing us a pro forma as is, as compared to a pro forma with that reduced density, and showing us that the profit margin is eliminated essentially. You can then have that pro forma or those pro formas peer reviewed. That process typically takes somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks. Give the applicant a couple, 3 weeks to prepare the pro forma revisions. Maybe they can do it more expeditiously, but then you have to engage your own consultant to do the peer review. We don't have 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks left in this process. So one option, if you felt you needed to go that route, would be to talk to the applicant and say, it can benefit you as much as it can benefit us. If you're representing to us that the density reduction will result in an economic condition, show it to us, prove it to us. If in fact our consultant agrees, then that's the end of the story. We know we can't reduce density, and that's the end of the discussion. And you can ask the applicant to allow that to occur for an extension. The applicant can also tell you it won't grant you an extension, and then you simply don't have an option of proceeding in that manner. You can either do what you're left with, which is rely upon the other information in the record, or you can deny the project because you feel you don't have the information you need and you want to reduce the density, or you could simply impose a condition reducing the density, which again could subject you. So you have all of those various options. To muddy the waters a bit more, we received correspondence. I'm sure the attorney often will speak to it, but I've spoken to him today. So I told him that I was going to proactively raise this to you tonight. We received correspondence from Attorney Alphen a week ago, plus or minus. That it was a couple 3 pages, but there was a reference made at the conclusion of that to the fact that they have explored, that by they I mean the applicant team, have explored a reduction in density from 11 units to 10 units. And the statement that was made, I don't have the correspondence before me, the statement that was made is something to the effect of, if that was of interest to the board, we could explore. Now, they haven't presented plans showing a reduction in density. They're simply saying that they're willing to explore that reduction. It's a reduction of 1 unit. There was also some discussion earlier on, I think this has been represented to the board, and might have been a point of conversation last time, that there could even be a consolidation of buildings. So we've had a couple of buildings instead of 3 buildings, which might result in an overall reduced footprint. So these are again discussions that you can have as part of this process. But how that feeds into your ultimate decision and the time you have left in this process, which again is only a week, you have 1 more meeting scheduled. But without a further extension, you have to close the public hearing in a week. And after the public hearing closed, you can accept any new information. So you have a decision to make in a week unless there's an extension granted. So I think the best use of time tonight would be initially to start talking about, aside from a density reduction, what other sorts of conditions might you want to propose on this project. Are there conditions that relate to engineering that you have peer review, or traffic that you have peer review, or other elements of site design? That was something the applicant, as I understand it, requested at the last session of the public hearing, because when you say to the applicant, go back to your pro forma, make adjustments and show us why this is uneconomic. Well, the adjustment is not just reducing the unit or 2 or 3. The adjustments are also accounting for the conditions and the cost of complying with those conditions. So it's a fair request of the applicant to say, tell us what are the conditions you're contemplating imposing on the developer, because those will add costs too. If those are minimal, then maybe there's more wiggle room to adjust density. If those are significant, maybe there's no wiggle room to adjust density. So I think that ought to be the chief focus of the discussion tonight. But we also shouldn't ignore the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is that offer that was made in the correspondence to potentially reduce the density by 1 year.
When did we get that correspondence? Because I have not seen that.
Correspondence.
that was talking about, that they agreed to reduce, they sent a letter.
Yeah.
We have Legacy Engineering.
Yeah.
We have Haley Ward.
Okay, I think with what I did, I got these and I sent it to Rod and Adam. Okay, and I think Adam, I asked, wanted to get it up to the rest of the board. So basically, it's a reduction from 11 to 10, 2 grades.
Did he give us
No,
pictures or
no.
anything? It's just a letter saying,
Again,
Willing to explore.
yeah, right.
because I thought when we left the last meeting, we had asked about reducing. And we had asked about changing footprints, and we got no. We asked about a performer, and we got no way. I thought that's how we left it the last meeting, so this is new to me.
So correct, like that was, last meeting was, no, this is where it is. I think it's,
Down to the wire, and now all these things are popping up. I don't think that's fair to us as a board to all of a sudden learn tonight.
Well-
We have tonight and next week, and we gotta come up with a decision, and now there's new information, so.
Is 10 units I guess the condition, or is it the solution to the conditions? I didn't quite want to get it. Right, the issues we had last time, there were a couple of right of parking spaces, right?
Yeah.
The trucks getting through, the issue
The
with.
location of the building,
Well, the
Safety.
proximity to the sidewalk,
Yeah.
right? And so if you said, I don't wanna have that, I want a little bit more space, whatever, then sure, the solution might be. And
but it's
Right.
10 in 2 buildings, but we're the 2 buildings versus the 3 buildings sitting on the road, 3 feet, 3 inches from the sidewalk. I mean, like, do we know where these?
No,
So we don't, let me say this, I'm gonna let the applicant speak to the proposal, I'm not gonna speak to the applicant's proposal, I'll defer to the chairman as that's appropriate. But let me say this, I appreciate your concern about getting information late in the process. At the same time, the applicant has no obligation to provide you with any proposal to reduce the density. So it's an attempt at a concession by the applicant. The way that I understood the correspondence was if this is of interest to the board, then we should engage in a dialogue about it. I would concur that my recommendation to the board is you've got to see. But it's a little bit of a chicken and egg because no applicant, no developer wants to spend the money redesigning its entire project, not knowing if that's going to be the board. So they spend another $10,000 on an engineer to redesign a project to reduce it by 1 unit, and you say, no, that's still not good enough to satisfy us. And they're right back where they are today, except they just spent another $10,000. So I would agree with you that if there's an interest, and again, I'll defer to the applicant to explain what the proposal is, and you can engage in a dialogue directly with the applicant. If there's an interest in considering that sort of a plan, and the board is representing the applicant to the applicant's satisfaction, that it would be reasonably satisfied, and it is more likely than not that presenting that kind of a plan would send the application in the direction of an approval versus a denial. I am sure that a conversation, a dialogue, can have with the applicant about extending the deadline to allow that to occur. But that's in the applicant's discretion.
Right.
I remember the old days of 40B when there was no 180-day deadline.
and let me just say, what Attorney Costa is saying is exactly right. It's a concession that if we get it, we couldn't pay if the board says that's something that we will accept, then it's back to us to say, okay, then maybe more additional time so that we can provide plans and that can be reviewed. Absolutely. Otherwise, if that's not of interest, then we're not gonna waste our time putting together a plan and providing additional time. We don't necessarily want to provide it.
yeah, I think in terms of the letter overall, I mean, I think it was sent through, but it was for an open discussion here today, right? With the overall board, because it wasn't clear criteria set or anything, it's a couple of lines with this
He
potential.
just showed me. I just-
And I just
So it's
forwarded.
not, it wasn't to keep anything, but I thought that it was meant for public forums, that's why it didn't say to Brian or anybody like distribute this or anything, I think it's again, it's for public discussion. So, and it wasn't a detailed, that it's what he wants.
But I think that it doesn't serve the board well, any more so the applicant for the board to ask the applicant to go through those steps, essentially send the applicant on full errand to redesign the site of the area is not going to be acceptable. So I think that while you can't predetermine your position, your opinion, what you will do with respect to the plan you haven't even seen yet. I think you have a sense at this stage in the process, not my role, I have a sense at this stage in the process as to whether or not a reduction of 1 unit and a consolidation of the footprint is something that would be acceptable to you. Whether that's acceptable because you think it's the best version of the project, or you think it's acceptable because it is a better version, and it is better than the alternative, which would be a denial or a severe density reduction followed by potential litigation to follow. That's up to you. But it is a discussion that should be had, because if it's of interest, then it would behoove both you and the applicant to explore that option. It'll be faster for the applicant than taking this through the HAC process, and it gets you 1 fewer unit for you today. So for your consideration, but so is a very topic of density reduction.
I have one thing while you're up there.
Sure.
I like things brought out right in the open. So if we deny this project as a board, and they take their cookies and go home, they're gonna go back to the state board, because I've seen this done before. And basically, then we have nothing. We have no say. I've seen that happen, and they build basically whatever they want. So I'm throwing that out there because some people might not know that, and then we don't get a say on the fence being 8 feet tall or 6 feet tall. We don't get a say on the bush on the corner we don't like. So I'm throwing it out there because I think we want to be careful here too, as the town, because I'd rather have some decisions in it than have nothing.
So I would respond to that by saying mostly true, but a little false. So let me just offer a bit there. So my role as your counsel is to be your advocate, which is why I'm cautious and careful about the statements I make. I'm not gonna send you in a direction of approval or denial. That's within your purview, not within. I'm also not gonna make statements that could potentially be used against you in the event we make a decision that is maybe not the one that I would recommend, or one that I know is more difficult to defend, and yet I might be stuck defending. Having said that, the statistics speak for themselves. Municipalities lose far more often than they win in the Housing Appeals Committee. It is developer-friendly forum. They have taken 40B and made it what it is, which is a mechanism that developers can use to force projects upon municipalities. Just the reality of Chapter 40B. And I would say that representing you, I would say that representing a developer, which I do from time to time. It's just the reality of the 40B process.
Right.
So you are correct in saying that you lose control. You deny the project and it proceeds to the Housing Appeals Committee. We are party to that litigation, but it's then in the hands of the committee. Now, what I will say, and this is why I said parking falls, what I've not seen the committee do is look at a plan that's submitted. So we have a plan, the latest version of the plan is before you, it's the one that the applicant's currently asking you to approve. That is the plan that they would be appealing to the Housing Appeals. So if that plan, for example, shows a 6-foot fence, I think it would be unlikely, it would be possible, I think it would be unlikely that through the HAC process, the Housing Appeals Committee would say, you were wrong in denying this, we approved the plan, but we're gonna take the fence, it's unlikely that they would do that. They would simply say, you were wrong to deny the plan, we're going to approve the plan as shown. But what they won't do is they won't have the 10 or 15 or 35, or I think in the case of the River States, 55 conditions that you impose in a traditional comprehensive permit. So all those conditions, like for example, let's say you want a local preference on the affordable units, which is something the law allows. Up to 70% of the affordable units can be designated for current residents of the town of Lancaster who want to remain in the town of Lancaster. That's something that you can impose as a condition. I'm sure the applicant would agree with. It's in 99% of the comprehensive permit decisions that I draft on behalf of boards. You're not going to get that if this is at the HAC. They're not going to impose that condition. You want other conditions, conditions that snow is removed from the site, for example. Whether that's fall snowfall or snowfall over a certain height, whatever it might be. That's not going to be in a Housing Appeals Committee decision. Again, when you issue a denial, it's a 1 or 2 page denial. It's going to provide the basis for denial, but you don't deny something with conditions. You just deny it. And so you're denying it without any mention of conditions. And so when it gets to the Housing Appeals Committee, while the committee has the option of sending it back to you, they could remand it and say, no, we're sending it back with direction that you issue this permit and you have the chance to install whatever conditions you like. I have not seen that done. What typically gets done is they either issue the decision themselves or they send it back with strict instructions that issue the comprehensive permit with the following 6 conditions, no more, no less, end of story. And so you do lose a fair amount of control once you yield that control of the Housing Appeals. That's another reason why I tend to advise boards more often than not, that unless there is a significant health, safety, open space, building design and safety concern that you can point to, that you don't feel can be mitigated by one of the conditions. And there are those projects that exist from time to time. But unless you feel that exists, the safer course for a board members is to approve a project with conditions that get you some protection, get you some mitigation, and minimize your exposure to hazard risk.
So could you prove it with conditions, for example, and I'm just throwing this out there, that the buildings can't be closer than 10 feet from the property, from the site? Like right now, they're 3 inches. Could a condition be imposed? They have to be a minimum of 10 feet. Or is that too restrictive that it makes it uneconomic?
So it's hard to say, unless you engage in that back and forth. Part of what we're gonna, that was the chief focus of the next meeting, is to talk about those conditions and get feedback from the applicant as to whether something would render uneconomic. The answer is yes, you have the authority to impose those sorts of conditions, but the answer is actually more complicated. Because I can think back to other projects I've assisted boards approving, some of them even not as comprehensive permits, they did special permits, where there's only one entrance and exit, and the board's desire is for there to be 2 entrances. So then, well, when you're making adjustments to a plan without those adjustments actually being made to the plan, as you can all appreciate, because we've seen the back and forth of engineering, it's never that simple. You want to increase the setback from 3 feet to 10 feet, or 3 inches to 10 feet. Okay, well, everything else has to shift a bit. What does that do to the depth of the parking spaces? What does it do to the parking aisle? What does it mean in terms of the stormwater management system? It might be only 3 inches from the building on the north side, but is now going to be underneath the building because you've shifted it 7 more feet in that direction. Now you have to shift the stormwater management system, and is there room to shift it on site? So I work with enough engineers that I know it's sort of like dominoes. You change one piece and everything else changes with it. So you can impose conditions like that, but it's difficult to say whether the project still works. That it's better to do that earlier on in the process, or if it's something that you feel very strongly about. There's a difference between an approval and a denial, and it arises late in the process. Work with the applicant to try to get the applicant to grant extensions, to make adjustments to the project site to see if it will actually work. Conditions that require a redesign of the project are challenging. Can they be crafted? Sure. Say that the redesigned project plan will be reviewed by the town planner at the time of application for building permit to ensure consistency with the conditions of the decision. But inevitably, I see it just ends up being a bit of a mess because the engineers will try to make those adjustments and they can't do it. Sometimes it's not. I had a project a few years back where there was a desire to shift the access from one location to another location, and that other location simply had a dividing island between the roadway and the building. And so it was pretty simple and clear on the plan that all you needed to do was eliminate that dividing island and make it a means of access to the site. And so the board I represented conditioned it on, we want the entrance to the site to be relocated from here to there, and it's going to be in the location of the island, which would be that was a pretty simple project change. It was clear that it wasn't going to affect or redesign the site. So you have to evaluate such change on merits.
But if they're talking of the possibility of eliminating one building and going to 2 buildings, isn't that a major redesign anyhow? So if that's something they're willing to talk about.
And that's, it's sort of, I want to kind of put this in 2 columns. We have, what we intended to discuss today were not for any concessions or commitments or offerings by the applicant. And that is, how do you intend to condition the project? Are any of those conditions related to density? And then what is the advice, the response we're getting from the applicant in terms of whether that's feasible, whether that's economically viable? So that's this first column. But then it's related. The second column is, okay, now separately, we have this offer by the applicant to reduce the density. And they're offering to reduce it by one unit, and to consolidate the buildings. That is probably something you're going to want to see on paper. And I think you should the applicant say there's a willingness even to go down that path, but only with the board first saying that if you go down that path, it's more likely than not that we're going to support this. But yes, we want to see it on paper because we want to see what that means in terms of how much open space is free up on the site, how much does it increase setbacks, how is it altering the site? It is tough to know that in a vacuum without seeing pen on paper.
If you don't mind, just to add to that, there's sort of 2 different roads we can go down here. That is, you can put a decision with conditions that reduce the density and access to put a pro forma, together, or we're maybe doing a redesign on our own and presenting that and extending cost. So I think that at this point, I'm sort of in fork here, post-production here. But we want to talk about something that we can work out, that makes sense for us, that makes sense for you, or we're gonna try to, go down the pro formas road, and that's gonna be really tough for us. That's gonna be tough for us. So we'd like to try to work something that makes a lot more sense.
And I'm gonna say it one more way, just to really be straight up in terms of, to your point, just be candid with the board about the options here. If you're here today saying to yourselves, 10 doesn't cut it, the density needs to be less than 10, we have all sorts of other concerns about the plan generally. During that first call, we should talk about what those other conditions are, what you want the density to be, which apparently is gonna be less than 10 if you're in that camp, that's your mindset. But we're gonna do that pro forma dance. And we may not even be able to do the full pro forma dance if they may deny you additional time and you may be stuck denying the option. That's the first call. That's option one. Option two is you say, you know what? I don't know that I was prepared to even deny it at 11. Now it's being offered possibly at 10. I can live with 10 with a few other conditions that provide benefits for the town. That would work for us, and that puts you in the second column. And if you're in that second column, then we should make that representation to the applicant. The applicant will presumably give us an extension of time. But that's with the expectation that they're going to come back with a 10-unit project with a couple buildings, and then you're more or less expected to approve that, subject to a dialogue and maybe a few adjustments. Again, wouldn't expect you to commit to that, but those are the two camps. You're in one camp or you're in the other. That's kind of what needs to be decided.
So it's either the 11 or the 10, we can't ask for 8.
No, that first camp is the 8.
Okay,
That first camp is you saying the density 10 doesn't get us there. 11 was not anything I was going to approve. 10 is not going to get us there. It's no better than 11. Not much better than 11. It needs to be 8. It needs to be less than 8. It needs to be 9. Whatever. It needs to be something less than 10. If you're in that first camp, then we're going to go down the path of I thought we were going to go down, which is we're going to discuss if that renders the project uneconomic. The applicant's already said it does, and we're going to do the pro forma dance.
I thought that's where we were at the last meeting.
That's where we were at the last meeting. Curveball we got, and it's not a bad curveball, but it's offering by the applicant to reduce the density from 11. So again, not a bad offering.
Mm-hmm.
Does it get you there? Is that good enough for the board? Is that better than 11? Is that not as good as what we were going to condition on it? That's only you know the answers for those questions. I don't even know how you feel. So,
And somewhat in line with what Eric was saying, based off last meeting, right, and the concerns that came up. I can see the state probably seeing our side of some agreement with having an issue with the house, 3 inches off of the sidewalk.
Safety,
Right.
density, yeah.
But the concerns with things like railroad tracks, kids live in cities and play on streets all day long, live right there. There's no way anybody's gonna take our side, in my opinion, that living 100 yards from a railroad is a safety problem. And you got simulations and a bunch of data that a fire truck can make it. Now, we may not agree with it, but again, if somebody's got a simulation and a bunch of stuff to prove they can do it, you're gonna be hard to fight against that. And you got a bunch of rulings, or I shouldn't say rulings, statistics, right, for traffic and how many cars, can fit in this parking lot for this number of units, right? And what the increase in traffic is going to be. And taking away 1 unit, right, you pick up a couple spaces, does that make a dent in that either? Not really. It just doesn't. I can't see any way in which the state is going to take your side on any of that, outside of 3 inches off the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And this is where I'm kind of with him, where it's like, you're likely gonna be in a bad position, if I had to guess, right? Denying the whole thing, those aren't really solid legs to stand on.
No, I agree. I don't think we've ever denied a project. I think we've conditioned projects and been very careful in how we condition them. And I'm not in favor of denying anything, but I want to work with the developer. It seems like the last meeting, we didn't work it out. We just, no. Everything we asked, we gotta know we're not doing it. So I left the last meeting with like a really bad taste in my mouth that we're not gonna negotiate anything. We're not gonna get anywhere with you. So to come in tonight and hear, well, no, you might want to talk to us. That's news to me. Because I think last meeting, pretty much, we're not doing a pro forma, we're not changing the buildings, we're not moving the location, we don't care if it's 3 inches from the sidewalk, you were just down on us. And, so this is different, this is totally different from last meeting.
And that's where I said 10 units, is it the solution or is it something to present, right? Because
Yeah.
our conditions really come down to, you know, snow was an issue. We talked a lot about that, right? And we wanna get the snow out of there. And theoretically, if the snow is always out of there, so you've got permanent snow removal, we don't want to stack it up, right? Then that helps with fire and everybody as well, because you don't have to pick up 5 feet effectively
Yeah.
out to the fence or whatever it is, right? So those are all good things. And then it's how do I deal with this stuff 3 inches away, right? And as we talked about, or I think I brought up, right, you could remove a porch, right?
Yeah.
And you could also maybe take out a unit, so if we want a few extra parking spaces or something like that to help there, because we're worried about everything being full, then removing one unit is a solution, right? Gives you 10. And I guess that'd be on notice, but the major issues that we have, I guess at least to put them down on paper, right, as constraints, are gonna be 3 inches from the sidewalk.
Yes,
Is the biggest one I can come up with.
There's the
Right.
safety of the people, the open space, there is no open space, there's nowhere in the design that exists today for anybody to move anywhere. It's just there, it's small lot and it's just all building or parking or dumpsters or driveways or.
I read into the whole 40B things more too, which is why I brought some of this up in prior developments that I worked on. I don't think we'd win the open space thing either. It's what we're used to,
It's a step.
but there is 2 triangles of land that are town owned that are right there that are gonna be open space. And that's presumed to be open space for everybody. You can't say, no, you can't go play in that lot of land, whether it's unsafe, we think it's unsafe to cross the street. They're gonna have to put a crosswalk in, whatever, I don't think we've been that either. If, like I said last week or last time, we all know that there's not, if everybody came out of that building and wanted to put a lawn chair in the grass, there's not enough space.
There's no space.
So there is next door. That's another way to look at it, as far as I'm concerned, because reading through some of the 40B stuff, that's. There is.
It's part of why I said it's.
There's area around, and it's not Lancaster way, it's not, but. I mean, you can't go places.
It doesn't override the presumption of need for.
Right.
Yeah, right, and that's kind of the space that we're in, right? The idea of reducing.
I wouldn't live there.
No, yeah, who's the tenant's being built for,
Right.
that, that's not
Not
our problem.
That's not our problem. Right. And I think if I look at it again, you know, when we started down the road of, do you take one of the buildings out and go to 7 and 2, right? That's gonna create more open space in the middle. I'd like to ideally see potentially the same amount of parking spaces remain. Again, because my concern, and I know reading through the traffic rules, et cetera, there's no way to necessarily calculate those one-off exceptions, a birthday party or whatever it may be, but they're gonna happen and people are gonna be moving in and out. And again, at least it gives flexibility to the space. So if you have, and again, I think the applicant's done, I know people have differing opinions, it's aesthetic, everyone's a bit different. But having the larger building, it's almost barn-like, and then the smaller, almost farmhouse-like, it's no different than if you go down Neck Road to some degree, and there's a farmhouse, there's a red barn that's almost 10 feet from the road versus 3 inches. But again, maybe that's a way to maneuver so that it's.
I guess I'd like to see how they would propose to put 2 buildings instead of 3, what are they?
Yeah, I think we have to be willing to show them. To move down that road to get them to, I think that's not unreasonable, I think. You know, I think. As we go through this ahead, I understand the requests of the people in the town, it doesn't make sense, it's too dense, and I can't say that I disagree with it. But we are stuck in the position of. We're given a specific charge through 40B, which is the presumptive need of affordable housing within the town of Lancaster, which we're not at the 10%, so we're hamstrung. And so to give us the ability to work with a developer to give us the best result we can. Because I think as we're all talking about this, and I think as Attorney Costa said, it's gonna be a high you're gonna have to cross a high bar. In any other way, so I think it's having to work with the developer to come up with something that's feasible and agreeable. That's where my head's at. And it's the other reason I asked Attorney Cost to kind of run through this case. I think I want the public to understand too the position that we're in, and I've sat on that side and railed against this, and now I'm sitting on this side. And it's very different, it's very difficult, so we have a lot on our plate, and in a short amount of time.
We've gone from 11 to 10, that's the right direction, the direction we're going. I'd like to see 9 would be all, but they're gonna reduce, they could go to 2 buildings, then we move that other building away from the sidewalk and give us a little more room
But
there.
that's what we assume, we don't know what.
And I agree with,
But
I think I agree with, I mean, got the right idea, we're in the center of town, there is a little park there, I hate for somebody to be playing there or whatever, but they can always go up to the ball field or whatever and play, but still, that's where I'm having a hard time. You gotta have a yard, but then I go down like Main Street in Lancaster, I mean, these people live right on the sidewalk, on the main street up there, the sidewalk goes down this far off the sidewalk up there, so what's so much different than being over here? The tough decision. But I mean, they've offered up something which is better than what we left with on the last week.
Yeah,
So one of the big concerns we've talked a lot about is the parking. And I know technically, for 8, we're down to 18 spots now, with the 11 units on the plan. But one of those is a flex spot, so if you remove that, and then you have 2 handicap spots, so assuming nobody in the, what's the ratio of handicap? We're down to a 1.4 or 1.5 parking ratio as it's, right? And our expert was suggesting 1.5 is kind of more typical for out here. I know the developers were recommending a slightly lower number, which they're still above. But for rural, kind of appropriate towns, our expert was 1.5. Dropping down to 10 doesn't sound like much, but that now gets us, even when you take those 3 units out, right? 3 parking spots out, flex unit, which you'll be even parking at long term, and then the 2 handicap spots will be reserved for handicap.
Yeah.
We're down to 1.5 worst case, only 8 estimates, right? So we're almost at that two spots per unit, so makes a big difference, at least in my mind, on the traffic flow on that lot, just with that one change. So I know conditioning that lot, that driveway is one of the things we talked about a lot. So we'll move on everything. I guess back to the question at hand where we started, what were other conditions we're thinking about putting on our one to discuss?
What do you think the big ones? I think you brought up this in terms of like the parking a little bit. The plan is, I guess, is where there needs some assistance too. Is they've come back with a redesign on the driveway. To me, that's right.
So we've got the one way, we've got a lot of back and forth and got concessions. We got the one way flow on the driveway.
Yeah.
We got the diagonal lots, which make the maneuverability a lot. It did dump our numbers a little bit from the 21 spaces down, right? Which is why I've got a little tighter and drop it to 10 units for those who want to, gets us kind of back to that 1.9-ish over there. So, which is good. We've added the loading spot, which is good. Yeah, I think the snow removal there though is something we will need a condition based on a lot of the conversations that we've had in there on just not on site. So
Yeah.
Just a condition of remove the snow every time. Never let it pile up.
Well, that was the best one, right, to solve the problem with visibility there, right, as well as the issue of the fire enforcement, right, get you fire. So,
Just to let you know, we have some of the very online cheap moving.
Yeah.
I think we had also talked about no parking. Signage in the streets, I don't know if that's been on the group. Okay, it is on the print, so I was that was
on
down.
the sidewalk, all that.
I don't want to stop this, but Brian, a good point. We have like Chief Moody on. We have our our peer reviews on that. I think we should at least hear from them, so then that way we can kind of let them do transition on, and then continue to have this discussion. If that makes sense. I don't want to stop, because I think it's a good one.
But at some point, can we ask the developer how they're proposing to do 10 units in 2 buildings? So,
Yeah, we're rough.
yeah, it would be nice to know how they're thinking of doing it.
Yes.
That could change a lot.
I think to go through first, I'll go to, I know Chief Moody, you sent or Commissioner Moody, excuse me. You had sent a letter today. If you don't mind just kind of walking through what you had sent through.
If we get, so we didn't get nothing.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, so I've been paying attention to this entire process and appreciated the way everything's gone. On behalf of the Public Safety Departments in Lancaster, we just want to thank the Zoning Board of Appeals for all your due diligence, everything that you've done, the Planning and Development Department for keeping our public safety departments up to date with the information and the documents necessary to make our informed decisions. But we'd also like to thank the applicant and their team for their attention to detail, their responses throughout this process. Our goal and responsibility is to ensure the safest community possible for our existing residents and for our potential future ones. So all of our requests have been made in an attempt to maintain that goal. I would like to think that we would all agree that an overcrowded parking lot, roadside parking, and limited visibility can cause numerous safety issues. And one of our biggest concerns has always been and remains the accessibility for public safety vehicles and personnel, whether it's police, fire, or EMS. Again, we appreciate the work that's been done and the work that has gone into addressing many of these concerns. And we recognize that these plans suggest and show that all the mandatory public safety requirements have been met. But I do have to say, on a personal note, it is disappointing to read that one of the suggested solutions is to have vehicles park with their bumpers overhanging the sidewalk, especially when that's the recommended primary approach for emergency personnel who inevitably will be responding to the residents of 13 Neck Road. In the expectation that everybody would be parked perfectly. It isn't a reality, and I understand that isn't a concern perhaps to you, but it will be to us. But again, thank you for all your consideration. Thank you for what you've done, and especially the departments that were involved.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions, comments? Or Commissioner Moody? Thank you, Commissioner, appreciate it. Next I'll go to Jeff Dirk from Vaness, just to kind of walk through and give an overview of findings. And every board did get all that, correct?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, Jeffrey Dirk with Vanessa and Associates. We've submitted 4 peer review letters to the town going through our findings. Is it the chair's desire that we walk through kind of our analysis from the beginning, or just our latest letter?
Just the latest letter would be.
Okay.
Yeah, you've done a lot of this.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. So our latest review letter focused on the most recent site plans that were provided as a part of the project. Based on our review, the site plans have been revised consistent with our comments on the project. The one-way circulation pattern and the angled parking are consistent with our recommendations. A couple of things that have been discussed tonight that I would just offer, not a part of our review at this point, but I think we've been clear from the beginning that the parking supply for the project that we're suggesting is 1.5 spaces per unit in terms of the overall parking supply. To the extent that there are changes to the plan that reduce the parking below 1.5 parking spaces per unit, we would need to review that, and the applicant certainly would need to provide justification for going below that number. The 1.5 parking spaces per unit is a housing appeals committee kind of low standard. That's usually the minimum that they'll accept on these site plans. So, you know, it's not something that if the applicant's going below that, we would need to take a hard look at whatever data they're providing to substantiate that. I'm not suggesting they've done that yet, but I know there's been some discussion about reducing the parking supply, and maybe that's not something the board is entertaining. But I would just offer that as well. I would also offer and echo the police chief's comment. As we're looking at the site plans and the parking space dimensions, the assumption is that the bumpers do not overhang into the sidewalk area. If the bumpers of those vehicles are overhanging into the sidewalk area, then the parking spaces themselves may be deficient in terms of their length. That was not something that came out as a part of the site plans we reviewed, but we would not suggest that the bumpers should be sticking out into the sidewalk area, because that does reduce the clear zone, as the chief was mentioning, not only for first responders, but also just for handicapped accessibility going around the building as well. So if there are changes in the site plan that either reduce the parking supply or that require vehicles to overhang into the sidewalk area, that's something we would need to take another look at, because it's not something that we would consider to be acceptable. Outside of that, our last review letter has recommendations that we would suggest, to the extent, as the attorney was mentioning, if you do move forward with conditions of approval, that we would like to see included in those conditions. The first one being that they implement a transportation demand management program. The applicants outlined what that program will be in their transportation analysis. So that, again, will be referenced in the control documents that have been submitted to you, but that should be a condition of approval of the project. The second thing in terms of our suggested conditions is that there is they developed a site distance plan for the project. The site triangle plan that they developed, it was a separate sheet that should be included as a part of the plan set that's approved. That's important because your zoning enforcement officer needs that information on the plan to make sure that nothing's placed within the site triangle areas. So it's important that that be included in the site plan set. The next suggested condition deals with bicycle parking. The applicant has suggested in their response to our comments that they would consider providing bicycle parking. We would like to see it stronger to say that they will provide bicycle parking. So we suggest that that be a condition. And then lastly, on the site plans themselves, a note should be added just indicating that the signs and pavement markings need to be compliant with state and federal standards. And that would be listed in the manual on uniform traffic control devices. But those conditions are all outlined in my letter of July 3rd. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board may have now or later on this evening.
What's his recommended size on parking space? The recommended size.
That's on the plan or the?
That meets,
It doesn't allow for a bumper to overhang.
right, yeah. So what size should each parking space be that would meet the requirements where they wouldn't be overhanging onto a sidewalk? I know we've
So,
thrown out all kinds of numbers.
Yeah, so let me just see what they're showing on their plan.
It's nine-
And have they indicated?
I thought it was 18 feet.
18 feet deep, 9 wide.
line road.
Yeah, given that they have the angled parking spaces, that should be sufficient, but one of the things you may want to do is require that they put curb stops in the front of those spaces if there's a reason. And again, back to the chief's comments, if we want to make sure that no portion of the bumper sticks out into those parking spaces, then don't allow the vehicle's tires to hit the curb. And you can do that by requiring the curb stops be put in front of those spaces. Those curb stops it'll stop the tires. And at that point, no portion of the vehicle will extend into or onto the sidewalk area.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just would like to ask a question for clarification while Mr. Carrick is participating. So, in his recent comments, he spoke to a possible reduction, maybe being insinuated by the board of parking. The way that I understood the discussion was if there were going to be a reduction, one of your members said it, if there was going to be a reduction in the number of units from 11 to 10, the number of parking spaces would stay the same, meaning the ratio, the average would increase from 1.4, 1.5 up to as many as 1.8 or 1.9. Is that correct? So I don't think there's any suggestion on the board that I've heard thus far that there would be a reduction of the parking. So less number of units, fewer number of spaces per unit than what is proposed now. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Correct. I do have a question for our peer reviewer. When you're calculating that 1.5, if you have a flex loading space and or dedicated handicap spaces, do those get included in that 1.5 number or excluded? So all three of those are normally included?
So handicap parking is included in the 1.5. The flex loading zone, I think technically that could be included. And the reason I say that is that the way that the applicant has said that their loading and deliveries are going to take place is that someone's going to have to call ahead to say they're moving in. They will then drop a cone in that parking space and that will be used for loading. One of the things to remember is that typically if someone's moving in or moving out, that means that there's a resident that's not living there anymore. So that technically the parking that went with the unit that's being moved into or moving out, that essentially is associated with the parking that could be considered the flex space. If the flex space is intended for like Uber, Lyft, FedEx, UPS, then no, that shouldn't be included because the 1.5 is what is required for residents and their guests. It does not include a loading zone, which is what this would be considered if they are using it and saying FedEx, UPS, Amazon are going to use that space. It should be taken out of the supply.
Right. So to clarify my comments from earlier, just to we're all clear, then yeah, I mean on the print it says flex loading space, right, for ride share vehicle deliveries. So there's 18 spots, drops to 17 out of 11. It's at that 1.5. So we're currently at the 1.5. Is whether or not you counted the wheelchairs that dropped up below, and if we would go to a 1.7 if we put 10 units and kept the same number of blocks, which is going to be a little better for what we want. A little bit more overflow, given the fact there's not so much on-street parking, there's not public transportation, really, better stuff. Thank you.
I'm just wondering, I don't wanna, thinking too right around the parking, I mean, I don't know, Jeffrey, if there's even a way to calculate this, right, but considering these are non-movements, or I think we talked about having, residents having more cars, potential condition to put on around vehicle management and permitting and enforcement in order to manage the number of spaces and the number of cars that each resident has, so that we're not, getting things from a safety perspective, not having overflow into the street or during these one-off events, people trying to park there and creating further parking situations. And my concern is that, yeah, I'll just leave it there.
That's one of the questions. Oh, go ahead.
Well, no, so I think some of the discussion that the board was having about, making sure you've got to post no parking. I mean, I hate to throw it back to the chief, but what it comes down to is enforcement. You've got to post no parking. And I think that's an absolute, both within the site and along the project frontage, that also has to be enforced. I also think that, it is something that the residents that live here are going to have to be informed in terms of what the parking requirements are at the site and what the regulations are going to be. It's going to be basically enforcement and posting the no parking and then informing residents of what's allowed and what's not allowed in the site. And it's no parking along the site frontage, no parking outside of marked parking spaces. And then I think that basically the building manager is going to have to ensure that as they're looking at the residents that are living there, that they're not providing, maybe they're providing parking stickers or something like that for the residents of the project. And basically not making sure that they're not giving out more parking stickers than they have parking spaces for, and that all guests have to be registered. I mean, those are the type of measures that you put in place, and that allows for basically tracking what's happening as it relates to parking, but also allows for enforcement.
I have also seen units where there's developments where there's designated guest spaces. Is that something we would want to consider? That a certain number of spaces are
I would think that's what they would have, would be numbered spaces, and you get space 2, 3, or you get, I don't know how you do that.
Right now, for the plan, they can allocate all the spaces purely to people living there. Other than the one,
I mean, I've even
Flex
seen
quick
it
time.
with some developments. There's some 1-bedroom units in here, they get 1 space. I've seen where the 3-bedroom units get 2 spaces. I don't know whether they're planning to, do that type of thing. The other thing, as far as a resident that's existing goes, with the parking bans on the street, it's gonna affect them as well.
You can't go, one elected by they can't park and you go and park.
So
It's a
it's
precedent.
how far a parking sign is gonna go, so that the neighbor, the people that are there, that's also gonna be.
Just say UPS and FedEx and all them have to come into the development and park in a specified
Not
spot. They park in the middle of
They
the
park
road.
in the-
They're not even gonna go in that development, they're gonna have in Center,
Park in the road and they're gonna go, like they do everywhere else in town, you gotta go around.
it'll be in Center Bridge Road,
Yeah,
right there in
yeah,
front.
yeah.
Because that's gonna be the easiest between the 2 buildings. Right? But those are things that I'm not so sure that we're ever gonna control.
No. I think it's trying to have as much oversight and a program in place, at least for the residents within the development, right? So I think I wanna go through all of your reviews. I don't think, nobody from Hancock is here, so.
Russ had a baby a couple nights ago,
Oh.
so he has a good excuse.
Yeah, that's a good fair excuse.
So, I'm happy that there's peer review from your side here, and that's fine, if they present, and I guess I'll just reserve all right to respond, and hopefully Hancock, and the peer reviewer, to discuss after the fact. But, I'm not gonna try to be an engineer.
Fair enough.
And then the parking for the EV, the request 20%.
20% of spaces near EV chargers,
Yeah,
That's for Mass Energy.
mass energy.
Yeah.
I don't know, Jeffrey had a comment on that or. But,
For EV, for EV parking?
yeah,
yeah,
I mean,
Chris,
Yeah, the
right,
20%.
can anyone park in those spaces or do they have to be left open like a handicap spot?
I mean, technically, we don't include the EV parking spaces in the parking calculations, but I mean, it really, I think it could be something where if a resident, what you could do is if a resident comes with an EV car, you assign them to the EV parking space, basically is what you do. And if you don't have any residents with EV cars, then you can just let them park in those spaces. But that preference would be given to a resident with an EV car when they're assigned that space.
but you wouldn't count those EV parking spaces in your total calculation for parking spaces.
We don't typically, but right, we don't typically because it's a special spot, essentially. It's exclusive to that type of a vehicle, but in this case, there's no freeboard in terms of the parking. You need, if you're at 1.5 or you're a little above, what I would suggest is that obviously a resident, as you're assigning the parking spaces, if there's no one that comes in with an EV space, you just let the spaces, be used as the demand warrants. If someone has an EV car, they are assigned the EV parking space, and then you move the resident that might have been using that space to another space within the development.
Any other questions for Jeffrey? No? Thank you, Jeffrey, appreciate you doing the notes, the number of reviews, thank you. Bethany or Doug from Haley Ward.
Hello. Good
Hello.
evening, everyone.
Similar to Jeffrey, I don't know if you want to go through the comments that you had updated based on the latest review and kind of give us the highlights from there. And I think I had a couple.
Sure. Yep. Okay. So I have reviewed the recent set of plans dated 6/25 from Hancock. And I have also reviewed the legacy engineering peer review letter, who's retained by the abutter across the street. And my primary comments are really still about the infiltration system and the porous pavement. I have some questions about those test pits and the soils that were observed in them, and particularly with that estimated seasonal high groundwater line. There are still some outstanding questions about the elevation, the topography when those test pits were dug. Because if you look at the test pit measurements that are recorded on the plan and you do some simple calculation plan, that puts their infiltration system within 1 foot of the estimated high groundwater, which is not far enough. It needs to be at least 2 feet. And the other big question that I had was just the evaluation itself. I mean, I know that they had a certified soil evaluator, but my question is really just that the characteristics that were observed on site in those test pits, they are different from the soil complex that you would expect there. And the other, major thing is that the redox, the observations that you would make to make that determination where the estimated high groundwater is, the soils that they have listed there, it can be very difficult to make that determination in those types of soils. So their estimate, maybe if we dig another pit, they do have the 2 feet. So I had recommended that we do another pit, and that it's witnessed by either someone from the town or another engineer or just someone else to confirm that determination that that is where the redox features are, that is the elevation where the estimated seasonal groundwater is.
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, I'm not sure if Bethany has seen Hancock's letter dated July 17th yet or not.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I have seen their letter, and I'm a little confused by their letter because what they're saying is that the existing conditions plan that was submitted isn't really the existing conditions. So I didn't see any other elevations that they had recorded associated with these test pits. So I feel like their letter is essentially telling us to take their word for it that there's plenty of separation between the infiltration system and estimated high groundwater. And that's really not what's depicted on the plans.
Well, I don't think that that's necessarily true. I would say, I don't want to try to be an engineer, but I do think this issue needs to be discussed engineer to engineer.
Yeah.
I do think, having talked to Joe this afternoon, I think that this can be worked out. So I think there might just be a misunderstanding about a precondition plan that was done by a different engineer and what we've done since then. And so I think that they just need to have a conversation. So I believe this is all better.
So to Bethany, can you talk to Hancock and kind of review this and be one off, or how should we do this?
Yeah, certainly. I can speak with them directly. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
If you could, that would be good.
Okay.
Between now and next week.
Between now and next week, yeah.
All right, I will do my best to get in touch with them.
Okay.
Obviously, I'll make sure that connection happens.
Okay. And there was some back and forth about whether or not this is considered a critical area for purposes of the stormwater handbook. It is a confusing issue. But what it boils down to is this site is not technically in a critical area. It could be considered near a critical area. It's not a critical area. Even though the design engineer did refer to it as a critical area twice in their stormwater report. And then they're now claiming that it is not. It is in fact not a critical area. But that doesn't change the fact that we still need to discuss whether or not their infiltration design meets the requirements for a non-critical area, which I will talk to them about. And I think that those are the most important comments that are in here. The ones that I really see as needing more discussion.
Okay, so you answered right in the first question around the ACDC piece of it, which, yeah, try to go to that table 18 on CMR, whatever, that gives you a headache.
Yes. Yeah.
However, your concerns around the porous pavement, is it around those kind of one-off events you're talking about, if somebody's putting antifreeze in their car or you know, doing an oil change, but again, having something spill off and infiltrating that porous pavement and getting into, I don't know, explain to me, explain your concerns, I guess, in more simple terms.
Oh, yeah, I mean, those really. Oh, sorry, are you finished?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, so, I mean, if people are parking their cars there, you know, they could be leaking fluids. They could be wanting to top off some of their fluids. Some people want to do their own oil changes, even though they probably aren't supposed to in that type of a parking area. Any of those spills are going to infiltrate through that porous pavement. And whether or not those oils are going to absorb to the soils there, or they're going to kind of float back and forth and follow the elevation of the water table as it's infiltrating. I mean, it could potentially travel outside of that area. But I think that the concern that was brought up here is if it's considered a critical area, that's, I guess, a more heavily weighted concern than if it's not a critical area. But I mean, it's still going to happen to some extent.
I guess that's also tied to understanding where the high water level is on the site overall.
Exactly.
Okay. So it sounds like that conversation needs to happen to either kind of quell your concerns or not. Is that conversation with Hancock?
Yes.
Bethany, can I just ask you, why are you recommending on the lighting and the stormwater rules and regs that we not grant any waivers?
Because I don't know that the waivers are needed. My concern is that you grant a waiver and you find that they're not meeting some of the requirements, and they come back and say, well, you granted us a waiver. Do we actually need to meet these anymore? Like, if they have a lighting plan, if they have lighting information that they've submitted that meets the requirements, why do they need a waiver? They just need to include those details on their plans. If they've submitted stormwater management information that meets the requirements, why do they need a waiver from that section?
I think Hancock addressed those two comments, no disagreement with the peer reviewer who responded that withdraw that waiver request.
You did, okay.
The waiver request of stormwater is procedural, and so sometimes we request them and there's a difference of opinion between boards, whether that request needs to be made or not, but we do it, you know.
And to be clear, if I could be, my recommendation to this board, consistent with past recommendations to this board, is that it not grant so-called blanket waivers.
Yeah.
Many applicants will make them, so when there's a request for a waiver from the lighting bylaw, you'll either identify the specific sections from which waivers are required, or you'll say a waiver from the lighting bylaw so as to allow lighting to be installed per the lighting plan. And then it's not opening the door to something in the future being not compliant. They get permission to do what they're showing you and nothing different than what they're showing. So we'll, as we work through the waiver list, if and when we get there, we will talk about the nature of waivers, but the procedural waivers are a good point that I know when I prepare these applications for private clients from time to time, I do the same thing. If there's a requirement in your bylaw for site plan review, obviously the comprehensive permit process usurps that site plan review. I still ask for a waiver from it because it's a provision in your bylaw that I'm not compliant. So procedural waivers are not uncommon, and there's no issue granting them because essentially the law already is. Mr. Chair, if I could add something to Ms. Rodon while she's on the call. So if she's gonna be conferring with Mr. Petzola from Hancock Associates over the course of the next week.
Yeah.
To bring resolution to this issue of test pits and groundwater and high water levels. I also asked that in confirming that the issue's been resolved, presuming it can be, that she submits something in writing to that effect. If she can also identify whether there are any conditions she's recommending, I know she does some recommendations in here concerning favors, but if there are anything, sometimes there aren't from engineers, because the nature of engineering review is you go back and forth with the applicant's engineer and they make site plan revisions. And if they make the revision, the plan already incorporates the recommendation to the consultant. But occasionally an engineer will have a list of recommendations that go beyond that. I like it to a traffic engineer saying, please add a stop sign, maybe it's not showing the plan, but they want it on there. So Ms. Ordine has recommendations of conditions, things that haven't already been addressed through site plan revisions. If she can put that in the form of a letter that she could submit with a final update to the board, at least we'll have that. Should you choose to approve the project with conditions, we can incorporate those into a decision.
Did you get that, Bethany? Someone on the chat said they have difficulty hearing from the podium.
Yeah, it's a little difficult to hear, but it sounds like Attorney Costa had just recommended that I provide my recommendations about the waivers.
That's the
Excuse
condition.
my recommended conditions.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I think that goes through the peer review, so that kind of takes us back to where we started. At this, which is around the conditions and obviously we get some good information here, but starting to talk about what we'd be looking for the site.
Well, I don't know if maybe we want to just talk about the potential revisions, because it seemed like we're heading in a good direction.
Yeah.
And if we're heading into a good direction, then maybe that's an opportunity to expand the public hearing, get more details about the waivers being requested, get more details about the exact conditions later on in an extended public hearing, if that's the direction we're headed. And so maybe we can talk about what we're plan and what I'm going to call the engineer tomorrow and talk about.
Yeah.
So I think what we're thinking is one building with 7 units, and which would be the big building, that would stay where it is. And then the smaller building along Center Ridge, which is right now 2 units, being 3 units.
It's going closer to the sidewalk.
Yeah, but because we're eliminating that corner building, we can push it down.
Yeah.
That's what, I'm not an engineer, but that's the conversation I'm gonna have with my engineers tomorrow, to see if that's a possibility. And so if that's the direction that the board thinks we should go, that's what we'll do.
The building that's on Center Bridge right now is 2, correct?
2 units, yeah. So that would be 3 units. So it doesn't necessarily increase the footprint, but it creates more open area because you have less buildings, and we can push that building back further away.
Because the other one would be sitting down, this is the one on Center Bridge, the other one would be here, that would be gone, so this could go back and knock it 3 inches off the side.
That's right. Yes.
So it would have the same sort of look.
Yes.
I
mean,
definitely, it would just be bigger, but it would be the same architecture.
Yeah.
You know, one thing we practice on is thinking of one building, but we just don't think that would look good.
They would look big enormous first.
I mean, I think in my world, in an ideal world, I'd rather have it be 2 than 7. That's real. I know what you're gonna say. It's not. I'm not gonna.
What are you saying?
But I
I'm not wrong, 2 and
I
7.
had to drag it.
I know you do. I just, yeah.
And just to be clear, I mean, some of the economics, the way that this is working, the reason why taking 1 unit works is that now we're gonna have 2 affordable units at 50 AMI rather than 3 at 80%. That's a good, so the calculations just work better. That's why we can eliminate 1, and this formula works. And
But they're still all rental units, so they all count regardless of what it be. Yeah,
And will the 2 be at 50 or at 60?
50, right?
50?
But the VS, yeah, but they have.
I think there could be 2 at 60 or. I think it's 20% at 60, 25% at 80.
I thought it was 20%, well, whatever the rule.
Whatever the requirement.
and by taking that other building out in the back, does that allow you to widen the roadway any and put a little bit more snow storage or anything, or? Yeah,
I would think at best what it would do is get the building off the sidewalk, because there's just.
Yeah.
With the storm management and all of that, I don't see how there's much difference there, but what it would do is space you off the sidewalk, a little bit more room between the porches.
Mhm.
And maybe there would be enough room for everybody to have a lawn chair out there,
yeah,
but that's.
because the other one was less than 10 feet from
Right.
the big building, so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that
It
was
might give them the
also-
room to put the bike stand in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's placing in the bikes are laying all.
Oh, yeah.
Right, thanks.
Yeah.
Nobody would be.
I'm gonna bike sit in my house. There's how many bikes still? 0. 0.
But I have it.
It's true. You have good compliance.
But it helps the congestion on the park.
Anything a little bit helps, anything helps.
Yeah, that's my concern is that safety from the overflow of the parking onto Center Bridge and neck in particular.
But if you ride around town, think about it, you ride around and you see people having parties and you.
Oh, yeah.
And then there's cars all over the streets, you
Yeah.
know, and
You can never stop
you
that.
can never stop. It's gonna happen no matter what.
It's just, you have to try and go about it in the best way we can for what we're presented with.
But the key is having on that special occasions, not every other week, right?
Right.
Like,
Right.
That's the problem, yes.
Right. And I think that comes back to, there's gonna be, I know we don't wanna talk about conditions now, but there's gonna be conditions around the vehicle management.
Yeah.
I think we have to do that.
That's why I brought up the last time we had a meeting. I know it's a little bit outside of scope, it's not on them, right? But it's that road coming off of that where it splits, right? You really need the right hand side. Because everybody can go straight and take a left or a right, and make the other side, maybe they do not enter where somebody, they can park 3 or 4 cars there. It's not a big deal, once in a while when I
You
have.
can go to the
You can
town.
fix that by the
It's,
rest of the.
yeah, it's a whole, you know, it's like one of those things, right?
Right.
You know, there's not as much flow there, right? It's the main drag.
Well, the reason it's there, you can't go up and then take that left and then take that right to get back on Main Street, so this is gonna go this way, and this one just goes straight across.
Yeah, but if, well, you could,
You could take a left, but that's like
Yeah.
turns.
Slight distances. You're going off of the.
It's
going
going
straight
straight
across.
You're going straight across.
You get some lights with that.
Nice.
Causes big accidents.
so where do we go from here?
So I mean, it's,
I think you
get an initial plan, I think that's what you're saying, at least get an initial understanding.
Yeah, I think, you know, I'll talk to my client, who I'm sure needs to talk to his partner, but I think what may happen is we talk to our engineer, maybe we, send out an extension and a continuance of the next hearing, so that we have enough time to discuss these issues and we get everything settled up, with the peer review and everything like that. So if that's what I'm hearing from the board, that's
So then we wouldn't be meeting next week and the deadline would allow us a continuation until to August, our August meeting.
Yeah, because now the burden's gonna sort of shift on us to make sure that we have enough information to make the decision that we have to. So.
That's, I mean, I think we're all thinking the same.
Yeah, I think we are.
We've asked for something.
So I just want to point out a procedural issue.
Yeah.
So, I respect that suggestion, and I'm okay with that suggestion, but if we leave here today not knowing if we're getting an extension and not knowing for how long that'll be, you've got to continue to the next meeting, which is next week. You have to convene next week, even if you get that.
We have other
extension.
hearings.
We have
So you need to convene and there's an extension request, a continuance request that is paired with an extension to some future date. That you can approve the continuance at that time.
So they could come next week and hand us a continuation next, or they could give it ahead of time and then next week we could just vote to continue to the August.
I'm really hoping. And
That's what I'm hoping to.
But yes, if they don't tell you today to what date is being continued, then technically you're done minus next
Or
week.
we're done next week.
So I will need to make a comment, we'll need to have a discussion about approval or denial and closing the hearing. If in the interim you get that continuance and an extension, then you could simply continue it out.
Understood, we'll give the continuance and the extension. Okay. As long as you don't make us do a pro forma.
So then, do we make a motion to continue this to August?
Depends upon what date the extensions do, but yes, you don't need to continue to next week. If you're gonna continue to a later date, you're gonna get an extension at this time on the record.
Well, I would assume they would have to consult with their engineer, figure out.
I think he said he's gonna give us something tonight.
What do you have for a scheduled hearing?
I'm looking into, it looks like August 22nd, right? So that's Thursday?
Yep. So, we'll extend to give you an extra couple of days because it's, we always get scared if something happens, we'll extend to close the public hearing to the 29th.
Okay.
And Mr. Chair, I had a conflict on the 22nd.
Okay.
Just to make you aware, so certainly I can get coverage, I don't wanna make the board alter its schedule on my behalf, but just wanna make you aware of that tonight.
So if we close it that night, Adam, we start to discuss conditions and approvals, but we don't complete it that night, correct?
Right, so once you close the public hearing.
We have 40 days?
Correct, so what changes is you can no longer accept new evidence into the record, you can still deliberate amongst yourselves, still consult with me as your legal counsel. You can still reflect back on any of the materials you received over the prior 6 or 7 or 8 months at that point. What you can't do is if you need additional information from the applicant, you can't ask for that information. If you need to follow up on something received from a resident or resident's attorney, you can't seek more new information. Because you can accept it into the record once the hearing is closed. Once the hearing is closed, you're on a 40-day clock.
Yeah.
And within the 40 days, you have to conduct deliberations, review of the proposed decision, and ultimately vote on that decision and get it filed with the town clerk's office. So typically what this board has done in the past, most boards do is once they close the hearing, they'll schedule at least 2 meetings. Usually they'll choose those dates at once within that 40-day period. Then the deliberations typically require a couple of meetings.
Yeah.
Usually one meeting will be in short order, week to 14 days after the closure of the public hearing. That's when the real deliberation will occur, and then I'll get as much information as I think I need to be able to craft a decision. Then the board will meet a couple of weeks later to give you time to craft that decision, and we'll have at that point a draft before that you can review. Sometimes a third week is required depending upon the complexity of the decision. I think we met maybe 4 times on 3 different states. That was a lengthy decision, a very sizable project.
Yeah. So should we look at maybe moving our August meeting to the 15th? And then, would you have a conflict then, Adam?
Would that be enough time for them though
Would that be enough time for you to give us?
I
plans?
won't be here.
You
I
won't
will
be
be
on,
out
we
of
can't
state.
do that.
Then you would be, before. So what are you concerned about?
I'm not, I just told them I wasn't available. So,
Oh, okay.
that's,
Could we do the 14th of Wednesday, or
I guess what's the problem with
does it have to be a Thursday?
the 22nd, right? I mean, it's just, we're really meet the 22nd, we meet the 29th, and then we meet the 12th. The 22nd,
It's just that he's not.
He's not available.
that's when we're,
But Brian would probably.
Brian.
and that's when we'd be closing the
We'd be closing on the 22nd,
22nd.
collecting the plans and everything on the 22nd.
Then setting a date to start our
So
deliberation.
you're saying then meet on the 29th?
So,
And Frank
I don't know
says
if you-
Frank can't.
Oh, actually, that's gonna be Labor Day weekend, right?
So, I mean, we're taking votes. Not
But-
taking votes, we can, people.
I do wanna say, and again, I wanna wrap this project up probably as much as anybody.
Yeah.
If the next meeting is going to be an opportunity for you to review, maybe for the first time, revised plan showing 10 units and other shifting around on the site, you're gonna wanna run those revised plans probably very quickly past your peer review consultants. They're not gonna have, if you're not changing the design or the overall parking space layout, maybe you're able to widen the aisle, there's not gonna be an extensive review required. But if that's not gonna also occur within the next 4 weeks, which I'm not sure it's going to, but then it's maybe 2 more meetings, and maybe those meetings are not a month apart, maybe it's a month and then 2 weeks later. But it may be possible you're gonna need a couple more meetings to be able to first give the applicant an opportunity to revise the plans, and then to give your consultants 10 days to look at them and give you any final feedback before you close the hearing and issue the decision.
Right, because even if we get it on the 22nd, as Dennis said, we're done into the holiday
Mhm.
and it's the 10 days to like, that's a quick turnaround.
So at a minimum, wouldn't we need an extension until at a minimum September 19th? We would still meet on the 22nd, but we wouldn't have to close the hearing on the 22nd because we'd have to give it to the engineers for review, come back to September 19th. We could end it at that, close the hearing at that point, and then start drafting our decisions.
Yeah, that's really
That-
so far.
Sound
That's,
better?
yeah,
That gives everybody enough time to
we're not trying to,
reasonably.
it's quick, but we're not rushing.
Right.
And the board may wanna book out the subsequent meeting, so if you're meeting on the 22nd, you may then wanna book 2 weeks later on a Thursday, which would be
Which would be Labor Day weekend, so we don't wanna do
it
that.
would be the week after.
Well, then we week after, yeah, the next week is then we're heading into Labor Day.
It could be,
Right?
it could be the 5th, or it could also be, you could also book it on the 12th, and getting an extension through the 19th, but it may make sense to book one of those 2 Thursdays, so you get your next 2 meetings now.
So September 5th or 12th. And then we would be meeting on the.
Close the hearing.
No, we're closing the hearing.
Right.
He's gonna give us a continuance until September 26th. Okay, but we're meeting August
Wait a second.
22. We're hopefully we'll have new plans. We'll be able to get them to our peer review. And then Adam is suggesting we meet either September 5th or September 12th.
I'm available both.
I'm
Right.
checking right now.
Okay.
I mean, the bottom line is, we're gonna give you extension to September 19th, okay? That's gonna extend the public hearing, if we meet on the 22nd and there's a need, because of scheduling conflicts, because we don't have enough information, we're obviously gonna work with the board and make sure that it's comfortable, we can extend further.
So you're not gonna do the 26th, you're gonna do the
You said,
19th.
you had said the 19th.
I think the September.
Yeah.
You're aligning with our meeting,
Yeah.
then our next one.
Our
September
next
meeting
meeting would be the
26th.
But a
26th.
week,
We're gonna land on the 22nd comfortable, and then we're gonna see where we are, and if we need to extend further, we will do that. I'm gonna make sure the board's comfortable. I don't want anybody to be conflicted out with this family gathering or that. We'll sure it all works.
I'm going the 11th through the 16th.
You what?
I'm going the 11th through the 16th.
Of September,
So it's
the
the
12th is out.
So
The
it's
5th is
22nd.
open, the 19th is open, the 26th is open.
And to be clear, the board doesn't need to continue anything, it doesn't need to announce officially because there's any legal requirement, not the next meeting, but subsequent. I would ask them really out of self-preservation, because I'm booking like 4 weeks out, so if I don't put it in the calendar today,
Today,
a
you're not-
September meeting, and by the time we get here on the 22nd, I'll already
Yeah, but I think we should say the 22nd,
So August 22nd,
August 22nd,
September
and
5th,
September 5th.
and September 19th.
19th is when would be the next one.
No, the 26th would be. 1, 2, 3,
26th will be the next Thursday.
So the possibility of the 19th, and then our meeting is the 26th. That's what you're saying.
19th, I'm not free, but I don't have a vote anyway, so.
Yeah, you can't.
I don't count.
Yeah. Well, you do it.
I'm at least important out of it.
And I don't think the applicant was saying the 19th would have to be a date, I think they were just giving an extension.
Extension through that date.
Right, exactly. So you're gonna meet twice between now and then. If we meet in the 5th and you're really close and you're about to get an approval and you need 1 week beyond the 19th to your 26th.
So, I was gonna say, so I'm confused, are we meeting, do we have to have the decision on the 19th or 26th?
We have to close the public hearing by the 19th.
Okay, so we're having a meeting the 19th and the 26th.
That's a possibility.
Possibly.
Depending on in August, when we get the plans on the 22nd,
Yes. Okay,
okay?
I see, yeah.
Then we meet on the 5th and we see where we're at. We may be able to close it on
September
the 5th and start working toward a decision, and they'll give us an extension to the
We could have,
26th to have a decision then.
The peer reviews, right,
Right.
the fifth.
I would at least put it in a placeholder on everybody's
Yeah,
calendar.
right, just so
And then
everybody
we can-
knows that's potential.
So if you're ready on the 5th, you can just close the hearing and I'll start the 40-day clock.
Yeah.
So we're meeting next week, the 25th,
Yep,
22nd,
yep,
5th.
Yeah.
And the 26th or the 19th?
possibly the 19th, but for sure the 26th. Okay,
So we're not doing anything next.
no, because he's gonna give you a written extension tonight, but we do have to meet because we have those other hearings.
Right, exactly, but
Yeah.
but not on this.
Thinking about it.
For the minutes.
It was very classes. Oh, it's not one of my. Dependent on it. 3 years.
Right, so you're gonna,
And I guess the last question, what is your expectations for what kind of plans you want to see? You know, we don't want to spend, you know, too much money putting elevations together and all that, but whatever we can do, I have to talk to the architect or engineer, but if there's something specific that the board definitely wants to see, and a new site plan to go out to that. Now,
I mean, my opinion is I like the I like what the building look like.
Yeah,
I mean, I like the reduction, and if you push that one back, that's just my opinion on what I.
It's a public safety concern.
In a little
It'll be better.
Yeah.
Sidewalk and the road.
But I think what I'd like to see is the setbacks from the sidewalk, setbacks from the road, so how it fits in relation to the other building and the driveway.
Yeah.
That's
if you
on
could
there.
widen that driveway more, I think that'd be fantastic.
You know, definitely
You know,
heights and everything of the building too, because you're adding another unit, so I'm sure the you know, so we wanna see the footprint, how that's changing and, you know, I'd love to see an elevation of that one building, what it's gonna look like, or.
is it gonna be 3 side by side, you know, or is it gonna be 2 and 1? Or-
I don't know. That's a.
I'm sure it would have a rendering that we could look at,
Mhm.
so.
Yeah.
That should be looking for.
So
Alright,
we need a motion to continue this to, I'm confused again, August,
August 22nd.
correct? And you're gonna give us that in writing?
yeah, I'll give it to you in my house and like, you know.
Well, I'll make a motion to continue 13 Neck Road public hearing to Thursday, August 22nd at 7 PM.
I'll second.
No,
All right, so you have
oh, it is, I'm sorry, it is. Yep.
so a motion by Gene Rich, second by Dennis Hubbard. Any discussion? Hearing none. Call for roll call vote. So Gene Rich,
Yes,
Eric Jackowitz.
Yes.
Frank Sullivan.
Yes.
Dennis Hubbard.
Yes.
Rob Alex, yes. So continue to 8:22 at 7 PM.
yep,
Great.
All right.
And just a reminder, when you get the extension from Attorney Allen tomorrow, file it with the town clerk's office.
Okay. So at this point, I mean, you know, obviously there's been a lot going on tonight. I want to give usually I open up the public comment, but I think there's a lot to digest and see what comes back before we open it up again. I always want to get the public's input, but I think based on everything that's gone tonight, we can change that next meeting.
And that's acceptable, the plan's gonna change, so
Yeah.
once the public sees the revised plan, you know, new opportunity for public comment, that makes sense.
I'll make the motion, we adjourn.
Very motion to adjourn, by Gene.
Second,
Heard Eric first. Second, all right. Any discussion? Hearing none. Gene Rich.
Yes.
Craig. Yes. Eric Jacob.
yes.
Frank Sullivan.
Yes.
Dennis Hubbard.
Yes.
Rob Alex. Yes. 6-0. We are adjourned at 8:40.